start with that. It's like, I know you gotta have it, but I can't think. So what feeds the audio here? What's feeding audio? We have an HDMI cord and put it out. So why is this connected to HDMI? Why isn't it just like a regular cable? We don't need sound. I think we can we go about without
We're good?
All right.
Okay. Well, happy Sabbath, everybody. I thank you for all our online viewers and those that are here today. We're going to get started in our lesson talking about husbands and wives loving each other, and the bride of Christ and the counsel to Christian wives. Oh, so many loaded topics, I would say. I mean, this is talking about, behind the door. You can put on a front, at church, we put in our soundtrack, Happy Sabbath, how are you doing? Everything's great. But you close that door, man, that's a whole nother world. But before we get into that, I'll just introduce our panelists. We have Richard DeVos. Richard, what about this lesson stood out to you?
So it's kind of interesting just looking at this lesson. It's a much quoted verse that we're going to look at, the Ephesians 5:22, and kind of just looking at it from hermeneutically, the perspective of the time and what Paul was addressing. So I got quite a bit from just examining it from that perspective.
Oh man, Ephesians 5 is so loaded. There's so much in here. I know we'll probably run out of time, but we're going to try and get through it. But before we start, I'll ask Richard to start with prayer, and we'll jump in.
Great. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much. You gave us the Bible as a guide on how to live, and we pray as we examine these scriptures today, help us, Lord, to learn how to better live with each other, and particularly in our homes with our spouses. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So, getting into this lesson, I wanted to thank Donnie for the decorations. If you see online, you see these wonderful decorations. They look nice, getting ready for fall season coming up. I can't wait till fall gets here because it's too hot right now this summer. But let's talk about a hot topic, Christian wives, a counsel to Christian wives. And we'll start with Sunday's lesson. So when you think of a Christian woman, a Christian wife, what picture comes into your mind? This is one I just put up. I think one thing about somebody who's a Christian, first of all, they have to have a prayer life. I don't know how you survive without prayer. And Ellen White says if somebody who prays but does not read their Bible will cease to pray eventually, or someone who only reads their Bible and doesn't pray will cease to read their Bible. So they go hand in hand. And I was like, who are some godly Christian women in the Bible that stand out to you? Just right, thinking in your mind, what are some godly women in the Bible that really stand out to you? Like all the stories you've heard, or even people today, like I know my mother, she's no longer alive, but talk about a praying woman. But some examples in the Bible that stand out to me of the most godly women just reading in the Bible are Elizabeth and Hannah. And you might say, okay, Elizabeth, she was the mother of John the Baptist. And a lot has to be said about a child growing up, reared correctly. It reflects on the parent. And Solomon says this in Proverbs so many times. And what accolade did Christ give to John the Baptist that stood out more than any other person that's ever existed? And you read Matthew 11:11, what does he say? He says, no other man born of a woman was greater than who? John the Baptist. That's big. I think of Moses. I think of Adam, the first man ever created, even though he wasn't born of a woman. But he said, any person that's ever existed, nobody's been greater than John the Baptist. And that has to show, that has to reflect about how Elizabeth trained up her son. When did Elizabeth have her son? Was she in her teens? Was she 30s? No, she was probably like 80, 90 years old. That's a long time. And if you were at church I think it was last Sabbath or the Sabbath before, I think it was the Sabbath before, talking about wisdom with age. You know, if you have gray hairs, you're letting your kingly attributes show or queenly attributes show. And, you know, sometimes I wonder, and I'm just thinking right now, but I wonder that John the Baptist had such an important message to give that God wanted Elizabeth's life to be really, you know, got all the teenage, you know, angst and all those desires out and whatever. He's like, I need her really in the right mood. Because research says how a mother is when she's carrying her child, a lot of that will reflect on the baby. It has a strong impact on how that baby is reared up. And just in utero, how that baby responds to life, a lot of it is instilled on how that mother's disposition is while she's carrying the child. And so I think Elizabeth, as she came with age, she was probably praying a lot. I mean, her husband, Zacharias, he was in the temple. So I think, you know, just that whole time period, it allowed her to be at the best place possible, that she was able to really instill a good foundation in John the Baptist. That doesn't mean you have to be old to be godly and raise up a child. Look at Mary; she was probably only 12, you know, and she instructed Christ in as best as she could with the Holy Spirit guiding her. Another example is Hannah. You know, Hannah, you know, she prayed and prayed for a child. She prayed and prayed and prayed for a child. And her wife, her husband's other wife, Peninnah, she was having children all over the place. But, you know, you read in the Bible how she was just always jumping on Hannah and just being mean to her. But when you want something so badly and God gives it to you, sometimes you'll be like, Lord, I will do anything I can. If you give me this child, she was like, Lord, give me a child. I will dedicate it to him, to you, Lord. And you can see that how Samuel's life was when he grew up. You know, you read in 1 Samuel 2, I think it's verse 35, it was like God was saying, he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. That's a godly man. I mean, none of his words fell to the ground. God heard every single word that Samuel said and answered it. And Samuel, I mean, one of the you know, godly people in the Old Testament. And so those are two that stand out into my mind. But, you know, women, I mean, I have to give it to you guys. You know, in my studies of the spirit of prophecy and reading, you know, just all these books, you know, Ellen White says, and this one took me back, but I have to give it to the ladies. She said, the strongest influence for good on earth is a woman. And I read that, I was like, no, you gotta be kidding me. No, really? You know, the macho-ness in me. I was like, no way. But I was like, oh no, it's in there. And she goes on to explain is like how a woman raises, you know, her bringing a child into the world and raising that child, it affects a whole generation. I think of it like a car factory. Say Ford, General Motors, they put out a whole batch of bad cars, default and everything. If they do that over 5 years, you're going to see just the safety on the road compromised. But if they just consistently put out good cars, the safety on the road should be better. And, you know, just, I know that's maybe a crude example, but for a woman to really imagine just women just say, hey, we're going to raise our children right in the fear of God. A whole generation of them. Imagine how much better that generation would be if, you know, they're just, you know, just how that woman trained up that child, and you see all these children godly, fearing the Lord, it has a strong impact. So that's just my quick example of just, Christian women, and just what I see of the biblical model of just living for Christ and how your lives can affect your children. But I'll give it over to you, Richard. What do you find in Sunday's lesson?
So I want to take kind of a different perspective, looking at the marriage covenant itself. And so just starting with Ephesians 5:22, a verse that's often quoted and maybe misquoted, it says, "Wives, be subject to your own husband as to the Lord." And what interesting thing about this verse, and in order to kind of explore what Paul is talking about, and looking at who he's addressing and why he would say this, we need to kind of go back a little bit. Notice that "be subject" is italicized, and so that's actually, from most of the versions, if it's italicized, the word is supplied. But the word here is supplied from the prior verses, right, where Paul talks about subject. And so if we back up to Ephesians chapter 5, verses 18 to 22, he says, "And do not get drunk with wine." This is addressed to the whole church, right? "Do not get drunk with wine, for this dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ." Mm-hmm. And what is Paul trying to get to? What is his main point that he's trying to address for the whole body of Christians? Mm-hmm. And that we get that back all the way to Ephesians, just going back a chapter, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3. Mm-hmm. "Be diligent to preserve unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." And so Paul he's addressing Christians as a whole, and now within the family unit. He's looking at the family unit, the home, here in Ephesians chapter 5. He's looking at the home and in addressing what could be called household management, or maybe household authority. And this is a very important topic in those times, in the Roman, the Greek, and even the Hebrew times. The household management was a huge issue, and usually you had three authority relationships in the Greco-Roman world. You had the husband and the wife, you had the husband and the children, the father and the children, and then the husband, the master, and the slave. And so those are three very important relationships that took place in the Greco-Roman world. And remember, Paul is addressing Gentile Christians, right? And so it's like, how now do we put a biblical concept of the marriage covenant, the home, within the context of, within the culture that you're growing up with? And so first, let's look at the culture that they grew up in and that existed. And so George Knight, in a book on exploring Galatians and Ephesians, George Knight is our Adventist theologian, and he writes about the ancient Greek author. He says, Demosthenes had prescribed the accepted way of life at the time. Quote, "We have courtesans for the sake of pleasure. We have concubines for the sake of daily cohabitation. We have wives for the purpose of having children legitimately and having a faithful guardian for all of our household affairs." Marriage at the time was a very contractual thing, right? It's like you contracted basically with the woman to be able to do these things that you wanted done, and then he goes on. God. Oh, before that, go back to the quote. So at the time, when you think of the culture, even within the Hebrew culture, women had no rights, women had no power, men had all the power and all the rights. If a man, even a Hebrew man, wanted to divorce his wife, what did he need to do?
Just write a certificate.
Just write a certificate, give her the piece of paper, kick her out the door. And so men had all the authority. So it was a very patriarchal society that Paul is addressing. And so I want to take a point about how to look at how God addresses people at the time and how he moves them forward. And so I get this from a great book. It's called Bloody, Brutal, and Barbaric, talking about Old Testament war passages within the Bible. And the scholars William Webb and Gordon Oest write, God takes the existing cultural norms of ancient warfare and, to invoke a sports metaphor, moves the ethical scrimmage markers downfield, which is an incremental redemptive movement, but not all the way to the ultimate ethic or pristine ethic goal line. And so as we're reading through the Old Testament and we see that God is telling, kill all the women and children, or if you see a woman that you like, you can take her home and marry her, right? I mean, just capture her. And so it's like we would look at that today, in today's terms, the Geneva Convention, and say, that's horrible. I mean, what kind of ethics is that? And what these scholars are pointing out is God is not moving them all the way beyond the Geneva Convention ethics, and even beyond that, what God would really have. He's moving them down the line closer to what it should be. And so you don't see the barbarism in the Old Testament, what God allows, that you do in the ancient cultures. And so same thing kind of applies with the marriage. Remember, Paul is addressing this patriarchal society, right, where men had all the rights, women had no rights. And so George Knight goes on, he says, contrary to the mistaken view that Ephesians 5:22-23 is a command for husbands to exercise authority over their wives, it is in actuality a warning against the improper use of authority that, quote, forbids them to exploit their position and urges them instead to remember their responsibilities and the other party's rights. Thus, husbands are to love their wives and to care for them. Stott, page 219. Nowhere does Scripture tell men to rule or dominate them. And George Knight continues, if we really want to see what Paul is implying when he speaks of headship, we need to look to Jesus, who focused on care rather than control. And so Paul is addressing this very male-dominated, male-in-control environment and saying, men, take care of your spouses.
No, that is so important. And I like what Christ says. If you read Mark chapter 10, and starting at verse 4, and it says, and they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. And Jesus answered and said unto them, for the hardness of your heart he wrote you this precept, which Christ was the one that inspired Moses to write these laws, is because they were coming out of Egypt, they were witnessing so much pagan stuff. So Christ had to, through Moses, write some remedial stuff because they weren't going to jump all the way to Z. If you're trying to get somebody to change behavior, sometimes you have to take it step by step. You can't just jump all the way here. But Christ goes on to say, but from the beginning, starting at Mark chapter 10:6, from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. God takes what the Pharisees, the Jewish people at that time knew about marriage and everything and how they were acting. He was like, it wasn't that so. I'm taking you back to the beginning where I made them male and female. They were co-partners. They were equals. And Ephesians is saying, you have hierarchy here. God was saying, a woman be subject, to the man. That does not mean he's actually the number one servant. He's supposed to serve you. He's supposed to serve the wife. And just like, and he's trying to compare that marriage relationship to how God and the Son act. You read in John chapter 5, verse 30, it says, Christ says, I do nothing of my own self, but whatever the Father says, I do. John 12:50, I do always those things that please him. He's talking about his Father. John 8:29, he says, I do nothing of myself. Whatever my Father says, I do. So Christ is like, I am subject to the Father, whatever he says. But in John chapter 10:30, it says, I and the Father are one. We are one in flesh, and we'll get into that later, but they're one in purpose. But you have the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus says, I will give you another comforter. And the Holy Spirit, he does whatever Christ tells him. So there's a hierarchy in heaven, but they have one purpose. It doesn't mean one's greater than the other, but they have one purpose. And he was trying to say that in Ephesians 5. And people get tripped up over, oh man, I have to bow down to my husband and blah, blah, blah. No. And actually, one quick quiz question. How many times does it say, woman, love your husbands? Find a text in the Bible that says, woman, love your husbands. You find so many texts that says, men, love your wives. Men, love your wives. And I'll answer your question. There's only one. It's Titus 2:4. It says, woman, love your husbands. But I think it's so important for us. So we feel like we're just, oh yeah, we're the head honcho. We have to be this way, blah, 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 blah. God's like, no, you need to love more than anything because it's going to get to your head. But moving on, let's go to Monday's lesson. Richard, I'll let you start. Monday lesson.
All right, well, so just continuing with Ephesians, and so now Ephesians chapter 5, verses 23 to 27. Verse 23, for the husband is head of the wife, as Christ also is head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. One of the things that to realize as we read Paul loves to take kind of common everyday things and make them spiritual and bring in spiritual analogies or metaphors. And so he's doing this with the marriage relationship. And again, it gets to that point where he's moving it outside of a contractual thing to something that's sacred, right? And so he says, look, when you look at marriage, this union of a man and a woman, it's like, it's not just a contract. There's something more to it. And so he's bringing actually kind of the Christ and the church metaphor for marriage. And then verse 24, but as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be to their husbands and everything. Husbands, love, agape, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. Very interesting thing that Paul does here. And so I want to quote from a commentary, Word Biblical Commentary on Ephesians. And on this verse it says, agape does not occur in Greco-Roman household codes in setting out the husband's duties. Paul is introducing a new way to look at marriage. He says, husbands, they're not just your contractual labor, they're not just there for that. Husbands, agape your wives. So in terms of contemporary instructions on marriage, this, Paul's exhortation to husbands, is by no means conventional or matter of course. And what I find kind of interesting is today, that's taken for granted. Oh, yeah. Right? Husbands should love their wives, it's taken for granted. Right. It's because this biblical perspective has been brought into the marriage covenant, and it's now spread throughout our culture. And but now moving on, the second thing to realize there was, one, Paul brings the spiritual metaphor. Secondly, he brings in the love to the relationship. And then thirdly, he goes on, so that Christ might sanctify her, the church, having cleansed her by washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and blameless. And so, again, what Paul is doing is he is moving the marriage covenant beyond the simple contract between a man and a woman to saying there is something sacred going on in this relationship, and it should be treated as sacred. It should be even treated with that agape type love. I want to jump back into Ephesians 5:21. It says,
submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. And, a lot of people at wedding ceremonies, they tell the pastor, don't put that, whole submitting thing in the whole thing. I'm not going to do that. But, if you have a godly husband, okay, what does it mean to fear God? Proverbs 8:13 says, the fear of the Lord is to depart from evil. So your husband, if he's telling you, hey, let's go rob a bank, okay, that's evil. That's not a part of the Decalogue. It's not a part of the commandments. What you're saying is wrong. I do not have to submit to that. Or if he's telling you something that is not of right, because it says, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husband as unto the Lord. So whatever God would ask you to do, the stuff that is godly and Christian, your husband should be exemplifying that, and he should be living that. He shouldn't be saying, hey, yeah, you do this, but he's doing something else. And, and it says in 21, submitting to each other as unto the Lord. I've heard the phrase, a happy life is a happy wife or something. Happy wife is a happy life. And, there's a lot of truth to that. But what if her happiness is doing something wrong? Is that really a happy life in the end? So, it's kind of playful, whatever. But seriously, submitting yourselves, if Christ is happy in your relationship, then you have true happiness. And, but going on how God's trying to bring these two people together. Because what happened in the Garden of Eden, there was a conflict. They were happy being side by side, but Eve wanted something higher than what was assigned to her. And so wanting something more than what you had, then God had to set up an arrangement where they could coexist. And just like in the military or you're at a job, somebody has to be in control. Have you ever been at work and you're like, okay, who's in control? You're trying to what's my assignment? Nobody's in control. There needs to be a leader. And I apologize for all us men who have taken our position, and we've, tried to, act like we're Pol Pot or somebody, or Mussolini. But, we have to, it's humility, you being humble, being willing. If we're Christ-like, we should be the first to pray. We should be the first at the cross, and so these are things that, Paul is trying to get these people, getting these husbands and wives back together, because Christ is saying that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. So he present himself a glorious church. And when, a society is built on the family. If you have strong families, you'll have a strong society. Research shows this. And so, but it's been in the Bible all along. But any questions? I know we've been talking. We have a mic up here. I know this is a hot topic. So feel free to comment. We have some time if you want to jump in and share some of your thoughts about, this whole dichotomy of men and women just getting together and loving each other as Christ wants us to love each other. Let's move on to, Wednesday's lesson. And let's see, I guess I'll start off since my name's up there. Do I have a picture up next? Love your wife as you love yourself. All right. So Amos 3:3 said, "How can two walk together unless they be agreed?" Now you look at there, loving each other as you love yourself. So Ephesians 5:28 says, "A man who loves his wife loves himself." So when somebody comes to me, or they're talking at work and say, "Oh, I can't stand my wife," and whatever, I'm thinking to myself, okay, you can't stand yourself. There's something going on with you. Like bullies. Bullies, they are insecure in a lot of things. And so they pick on somebody to help them feel better about their own insecurities or whatever. And you look at this picture. I know this isn't none of your families. You guys are the perfect example what marriages should be. But, this is happening all around us. And, now you look at their demeanor, does it sound like they're on the same page? He's pointing at her. She's like, what? Are you kidding me? And you look at these things and it's like, how is this ship going to end up in the right direction? And how do you resolve this? And does the Bible have ways for us to resolve conflict? Because in this world, you will suffer tribulation, even the godly. And I know the devil hates godly marriages, and he will try and get in and ruffle the feathers, because that is a strong example of what Christ wants his church to be. And it starts with humility. And have you ever known you're wrong, but you don't want to say it? Because you just want to put it at the other person, and just saying I'm sorry. That can be the toughest words to ever get out of your mouth. It's just admitting, okay, I messed up. It's like the 12-step program. You have to first admit, okay, I messed up. Maybe I shouldn't have said those things. And words. We were talking about words just before we started this, and words hurt. Words are, James chapter 3, I think it's verse 8, the tongue, who can ever tame the tongue? It's a double-edged sword. And, you might say forgive and forget, but, I have to give it, women, they remember things. You back 5 years later, they'll be, I remember what you said. I know, and they come back with something you did a long time ago. Because, it's hard to forget. And when you look at 1 Corinthians 13, say love is patient, kind. It doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. And the one I have the hardest problem with is that it keeps no records of wrongs. We've got computers in our heads that it's like it remembers, especially the bad things, How do you, to forget. Say somebody just comes up to you and says, you know what, I heard you singing up, and you were singing at song service, and I heard 2 flat notes. And, and everyone else comes up to you and say, oh, you did a good job, you did a good job. Who are you going to remember who said something about you? You're going to remember that person who came up to you and said, I heard 2 flat notes. You'll forget all the good things. Here's another example. Remember Caleb and Joshua? They came back with a report from, you read this in Numbers chapter 14 and 13. And they came back and said, yeah, the land is great and everything. And all it took was the other people, the ones that went in to say, oh yeah, but there's giants. Oh, it's terrible and everything. And it throws everything off. And Solomon says it great in Ecclesiastes 10:1. He says, a fly in the ointment spoils the whole thing. And all it takes is one little thing. And so our words are so important to make sure we say right, but forgetting wrongs. And I think that's a supernatural thing. What does Jesus say? And Micah 7:19. Where does Christ put our sins? Where does he put our sins? In the depths of the sea, and remembers them no more. But sometimes we'll try that, but we bring our fishing rod. We're like, where was that, what you did to me? And go find that sin and pull it up. And like, yeah, I remember what you did. Keeping it buried away. I think it's a supernatural thing. I struggle with it. I'm not going to lie. Because, some people can hurt you so much. But that gets in the way of us being able to come together. Until you're able to reconcile, and to be agreed, you've got to have those real conversations. And I believe it starts with humility. Somebody just saying, hey, I'm sorry. I messed up. What do you think, Richard, on Wednesday's lesson?
Let me quote first from Ephesians 5:28-30. It's so husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. And Katie, go back to the picture that Sean had of the arguing couple. And I want to ask, thinking Ephesians as a whole, right? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3 says, being diligent to preserve unity in the spirit of bond of peace. Do you see unity and peace in this picture, right? And it's like, no, that, Paul is encouraging us, preserve the peace, preserve the unity, do whatever you can, to make sure you do that. And then Ephesians 5:21, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ, right? And so again, is that picture, back to the picture, does that picture show being subject to one another in the fear of Christ? And it's like, no. I want to follow up with 2 points that you made, Sean. One was words are so important, and one of the things you will never hear me say, you will never hear me criticize my wife. Period. That is unacceptable.
Amen.
To criticize our spouse. Now, when I told Katie that, she said, even when she deserves it. It's like, no, but never in public criticize your spouse. And in fact, I read from Adventist Home, Ellen White writes, page 177, the heart of his wife should be the grave for the faults of the husband, and the heart of the husband the grave for his wife's faults. Never should either party indulge in a joke at the expense of the other's feelings. Never should either the husband or the wife in sport or in any other manner complain of each other to others. It's like, when I read a great little book a while back, Letters to Philip, and one of the points that he made in there was never criticize your wife in public, and I have absolutely taken that to heart, and it is so disheartening when I hear people complain about their spouse. It's like, no, I am to be the knight in shining armor for my wife, and the other way around. Let's treat our spouses like they are the special, precious people that God intends them to be. And the second part about forgetting wrongs. It's like, we have to forgive, and sometimes it's better just go for a walk and cool off before you continue words. Let's make sure we preserve unity within our families.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's there's a text in I think it's Proverbs around 30, verse 10 or 12. It's like don't chastise a servant, to his master, because in that master, however that master feels about that servant will attain. He will, if you come to that master and say, your servant's this and that, and that servant will be like, no, that is my right hand man, how dare you say anything about them. There's things you have to be careful about, and I like what Richard was saying. I will not tolerate somebody saying anything, disrespectful about my wife, and you have that protection, and God created a female to be protected. Her first, as like a young daughter, your first ideal that you see usually in a good home is the father, a protecting father. And you see this, God wanted that to be seen, and when it's right, you have a good view of your father, like, that's where I go to, that's where I feel safe and secure. And, he created, that's why he took a rib, from Adam from his side. not from his foot, so she'd be trampled on. God didn't take a bone from his head, so he'd be henpecked. You know, he took it from his side, so he would be nourished, and you know, they're side to side. The embrace of, you know, we're co-equals. You know, because you try. You know, I used to go like whitewater rafting, and you know, if you know the one side of the boat is not rowing correctly, and you're trying to steer to get to this, you know, so you're not getting in this terrible whitewater, and it's a safer, you know, line down the river. You know, you can be in a whole bunch of mayhem. So, you know, you both need to be working together. And so being able to come together, you know, Ephesians chapter 4 says, do not let the sun go down on your wrath. Do not go to bed angry at each other. You know, first of all, you don't know when you're going to wake up. You know, tomorrow is not promised to you. You know, how would you like to be at the funeral and you just had an argument with your, you know, spouse who died? You're like, oh no, that feels bad. You know, make it right. Make it right while you still have time, while there is still day. Let's see. Let's move to Thursday's lesson. Does anybody have any comments? Anything you want to share about? I mean, this is real life what we're dealing with. You know, this is not easy. This is a work in progress. And so if you're married, you probably know, oh yeah, I know this isn't easy, but you know, God gives us the power to get through this. So one flesh, the model of marriage. Richard, what is this talking about?
So I think just to key on a word that you mentioned, which is working together, actually is team, right? Oh. We're a team when we come into a family unit. Husband and wife is a team, and that's the one flesh model, I think. So Ephesians chapter 5, verses 31 to 33, it's quoting, of course, from Genesis. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Again, Paul is elevating marriage from just a contractual thing to a deeply sacred spiritual thing. And so it's like you are now together. You're a team. You're working together to fulfill, you know, a joint purpose together. And the verse 32, this mystery is great, but I am speaking of the reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. So when we're looking at a team and just going back again, I want to reemphasize that as I look at this, I look at Paul speaking to a very patriarchal society where men had all the power, women had no power, and you know, I think a lot of that. You know, you mentioned some women in marriage vows will say, I'm not going to enter into that kind of submission, you know, even though it's submit to one another, you know, Paul says 2 verses earlier. But in today's terms, where women are not the powerless and with no rights, like they were there, how do we, the question is, how do we take the principles, what Paul is addressing here, and apply it to today's modern marriages? And so I want to put up a graphic. This is maybe how we could look at men and women. And so you have men and women, and you've got feminine and masculine, right? And so most women are, of course, more feminine than most men, and the other way around. Yet there's also some crossover, right? You have some women who have more masculine perspectives than maybe the males, than some males, right? And so the question is, when you, as a team, right, we're to submit to one another. We're there. It's a sacred union, joining, becoming one flesh. This man and the woman. How do we navigate the roles and responsibilities within our marriage? And they may be different for us today than they were for Paul. I mean, back then, men went out to work. They did the work, they brought in the money, and you know, and they had all the responsibilities. Today, maybe the woman is doing the finances, right? And so how do you navigate through that? How do you apply the principles? And I think the principles the main points that Paul is making that we want to go back to is, number one, it's unity. Strive for the unity, strive for the harmony with each other. Submit to one another, right? We're trying to establish the right thing, and it's sacred. Make sure we make sure that whatever it is we're building, it is sacred. It's like Christ and the church, and let's treat our marriage that way and navigate through whatever those issues are that we have, to juggle the roles and responsibilities that we have.
Yeah, you know, I was sharing in Mark chapter 10:6, is Christ was saying it was not that way from the beginning, you know, talking about marriage. So Christ is taking everyone, he's took them all the way back. How's the model? What's the ideal? What's the standard? And so what happened at the beginning? So at the beginning, Adam and Eve, they were doing just great. And you know, if you've read Patriarchs and Prophets talking about how the angels came and instructed Adam and Eve together that there was a foe that was lurking. Do not go to that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They were instructed, and they were told how he fell and how the devil, you know, messed up in everything. And so Eve, because Eve had wandered from Adam's side before, and so the angels had come and say, hey, you guys need to stay together. You know, you need to stay together. It's like an accountability partner, you know, and I think that's important. I think wives are great accountability partners. You know, like I think they are, because they seem to have eyes all over. You know, mothers seem to have eyes all over their head. They see everything. But, you know, and so Eve, when she wandered away again, the spirit of prophecy talks about that. She realized, I'm not near Adam's side. And then she was like, but you know what? I think I can make it. I'm just in the garden. I'm fine. And then all of a sudden she finds herself, you know, up by the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you know. And imagine if Adam was right there. You know, how could that have changed if Eve had just, you know, she was just close to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Adam just like, hey, you know, we talked about this, you know, blah, blah, blah.
So they didn't have car salesmen back then.
They should.
But that I know the number one way to avoid a high pressure situation is, I need to discuss this with my wife or with my husband.
Yeah, that's a great out, you know, and so you read in 1 Timothy 2, it says Adam was not deceived. The woman was deceived, but Adam was not deceived, because when she came with all that fruit back to Adam, you know, Adam knew what had happened. And we know us guys know what Adam should have done. We should have said, Lord, I don't know, she doesn't look right, but if you have I have more ribs if you got the time, you know. But no, he loved her through that. You know, they should have stayed together, and we know this. But it's important about being one flesh, is coming together. And, you know, like, hey, I have my ideals that I think I want to do for this plan. But what do you think? You know, not just, you know, taking the, you know, hey, I'm the king, whatever I say goes, kneel before me, and, you know, whatever. But, you know, just coming together. And I like what 1 Peter 3:7 says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. So one way to hinder your prayers is not to honor your wife. You know, you're like, wonder why your prayers, hey, Lord, I've been praying for this for a while, but you've been, you know, wrong to your spouse. You know, one way for your prayers to be, for God to hear those prayers is make sure you're treating the one he put under your care with dignity and honor. And, and even if you're having disagreements, do not spill those out at work or out at, church, because, people think thoughts, people find a way to move in, blah, blah, blah. You compromise the vessel. But let's see, any comments or questions on Thursday's lesson, one flesh? And it's such a big deal, just like Jesus says in John 10:30, I and the Father are one. They're one in purpose. And in order to go a certain trajectory, both have to be in consonance with that plan and to execute it correctly. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, I think Paul has elevated the whole idea of marriage way beyond what they thought of back then, and so and today it's kind of it's commonplace to use the ideas that Paul was kind of introducing to the church at that time, and just thinking of how men and women could just divorce their wives so flippantly, even in the Jewish, in the Hebrew culture, and certainly in the Greek and Roman cultures, and to see how that has changed. It's like, no, marriage we now consider to be a lifelong commitment to each other. It often doesn't work out. Unfortunately, there's marriage does have a lot of enemies, but that's something that I think the teachings from Paul, from Peter, from Jesus has really elevated that to be. And so I think we should treat it, very, very seriously, because it is not just a contract; it is a special relationship.
Right, and these are the signs of the last days. What they'll be eating and drinking, and what giving and taking of marriage. This is one of the signs of the last day. This is why this text, this passage, and what Paul's talking about is so important, because marriage and the Sabbath were the only two institutions that came out of the Garden of Eden. These are holy institutions that came out of the Garden of Eden, and the devil wants to tear them both down. And if you've been running into the LGBTQPRS, whatever movement, out there that, they're attacking marriage. Marriage is now like, it's whatever you want. You can marry an animal. It's like you can marriage, because the devil wants to make it of none effect, just like he wants to make the Sabbath of none effect. And when you what Ellen White says, if we all worshipped and honored the Sabbath, there wouldn't be an atheist or an infidel. And you're tearing down the marriage. You're going to tear down society. People, after a while, the remnants of that, it's destructive, but it's happening before our eyes. And so that's why we need to be examples of upholding the Sabbath, upholding the beauty of marriage, upholding the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, so people will see that light on a hill, like, hey, you know what? Things aren't working in my life how the world is saying. What do you have to offer? Because it looks like something's different about you.
That's a really good point. I mean, we as Adventists are really good at elevating the need to honor the Sabbath. I think we also need to get just as good at the need to honor our spouses.
Right.
What can I do? What can we do to raise and honor and support our spouses? I agree. And just to wrap it up, Ephesians, we've mentioned this a few times, Ephesians 2:4, Revelation 2 verse 4, talking about the church to Ephesus, that, the reason Christ had problems with the church of Ephesus is because they forgot their first love. And, that's, marriages, I think, end because it starts with the small things. Maybe you like pushing,
throwing your toothpaste out when it's halfway full. What? Maybe you're the one that wants to push it all the way to the end, or maybe it's putting the toilet paper over instead of under. It's something small, usually, and it builds and builds and builds and becomes this gigantic thing. And so forgetting the first touches, the first things that brought you together, the flowers, or the kind words, or those little things, you forget those. You don't remember when you held the door open for her when she got in the car. Now you're like, well, what are you waiting for? It's like, it's remembering those little things that matter. Hold the door open, or now I know some women don't like the door being held open because this is a new generation, but I'm old school. It's like I think it's important. Doesn't mean you can't open it. It just, I'm being a gentleman, but that's another point. But remembering those first things, because I guess men, we might not care for it, but women do. You bring her home an apple. You know what she's gonna think? I'm guessing, but I think she'll be like, hey, he was thinking about me. Hey, he thought about me today, and that means something to her. She doesn't have to have a Cadillac. Maybe she wants one. But the point is, the little things matter. And what is? I think that's Songs of Solomon 2:14. The little foxes spoil the vine. Aha, I got it in there. The little foxes spoil the vine. You let them little things come in. There's a little thing. All it takes is a little of them, and they'll destroy everything. So don't forget the little things. And I think that will help this whole one flesh of, we're talking about marriage and unity. Go back to where you started. What made her happy in the beginning? What made him happy in the beginning? Was it that dish you cooked that wasn't yours? Your mom made it, but you brought it to him and he thought it was you cooked it. Whatever it is, get back to the little things, and I think that will help us get on the road to really exemplifying godly relationships. Let's see. I guess we're out of time, unfortunately. But I appreciate you guys being in here and you online. And I guess we'll wrap up with prayer. Kind, loving Father, Lord, thank you so much for giving us the examples of how we should live. Lord, in this time of just utter darkness, Lord, there's just winds of doctrine just blowing everywhere, telling us, no, this is the way, this is the way. But you said in your word, Isaiah 30:21, you will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk ye in it, Lord. And may we be tuned to your voice to show us how to live and follow these principles that are in your word. Lord, thank you so much for all that you've done for us. Continue to bless each and every person here or online or who's listening. May they feel your presence, and Lord, may you transform their lives and whatever they're struggling with, and let them know that you will never leave them nor forsake them. Thank you for hearing these prayers in your precious name, Jesus. Amen. All right, thank you guys for coming. Happy Sabbath.
Thank you.